Hello, everyone, and welcome to All Things Watched, the place where we talk all things movies, television, streaming, and everything in between. So, if you like that kind of thing, then go ahead and click that subscribe button. But in this video today, we are going to talk about episode 3 of the newest chapter of the Walking Dead universe and the newest expansion and spin off of the entire series, which is titled, of course, The Ones Who Live. And episode 3 was titled Bye, because the first 3 episodes were titled Years Gone By, and so this is the third episode, and so it's called Bye. And so this episode actually opens up with Jadis and Rick, and it actually opened up saying years ago, so this is very likely shortly after Rick has actually recovered from the explosion on the bridge after he's healed up and, you know, obviously able to walk around, and he's able to get around, and he looks pretty healthy and strong again now. And we see him walking around, you know, in one of the communities here at the Civic Republic, and of course Jadis is here. And I've really enjoyed this scene because I was actually someone who was very adamant about having flashback scenes with Jadis. Honestly, I would not have even cared if, like, I would even be interested in seeing an entire series based on Jadis, just to see how she got to the junkyard and then see how she ends up getting tied into the CRM. I think Jadis is a very compelling story, and she does a great job at playing a villain, especially playing off of Andrew Lincoln and his character Rick Grimes. I just think when they are both on screen, they have such an awesome dynamic, because they do sort of share this mutual respect, but at the same time there is, you know, tension between them. You know, they don't always agree with everything, of course, but I do think that at the end of the day, both of them only want what's best for their people and for their communities and for civilization as a whole, because even though technically Jadis is a villain, you know, she is very loyal to the CRM. I do think that she wants to better the world, and I do think she wants civilization to come back to some degree in some weird shape or form of, you know, you know, whatever it can be in this type of world. And so they get a really cool banter here, and I really like something that Rick actually says to Jadis. He actually says to her, you know, why would you save me, or why would you bring me to a place that I can't leave? And she's just like, well, you're alive, aren't you? You would never have survived. I basically did this to save your life. You know, as we can remember, he ended up saving her life back during the All-Out War against Negan and Hilltop and all, you know, basically all the giant communities. Well, giant at that time. They're not that big now compared to the Commonwealth or the CRM, but during that time, you know, it was pretty cool to see the different communities. And so it was just really cool banter back and forth, how he's like, you know, you saved me, but I don't really have much of a life, and I'm not really allowed to leave. So, you know, she sort of, you know, holds that over him throughout this whole episode. You wouldn't be alive if it was for me, and that sort of thing. So I really like that little flashback sequence. Then we move ahead in time now, which it then says hours ago, which of course they're referring to the meeting that Jadis and Rick will have, which is how episode 2 ended. She was in his apartment and she was drinking and whatnot, but she just went ahead and let herself in. Well, this is now hours before that meeting, before she ended up going into Rick's apartment. And of course, Rick is here speaking with Thorne, and, you know, basically Thorne, you know, he's telling Thorne, you know, basically talking about Michonne, how he's going to try to protect her somewhat, and how she should put her into the same program that him, her, and Okafor was a part of, just because she tells, you know, he seems to try to manipulate her and tell her that Michonne will be a really good ally as opposed to an enemy. And so, of course, at this point, Rick is in basically desperation mode. He obviously doesn't want the CRM to find out who Michonne really is and whatnot. So this is sort of why he's reaching out to Thorne, and he's sort of, you know, asking Thorne for help, so to speak, and basically asking Thorne to keep an eye on Michonne to make sure nothing happens. And then it finally catches up and comes to the present day, where we now see Jadis and Rick, and where Jadis actually confronts Rick in his apartment and basically lays down the law and basically tells him this is how it is. If, you know, she literally tells him that if for some reason she ends up meeting an untimely demise, which of course means if she's killed or if Rick decides to kill her, then she has a folder, she says, with all the information about all the ones he loves. So I would assume that would be like Hilltop, Alexandria, and plus all of Rick's family members and all the friends and all that stuff, and probably even Judith and whatnot as well. And so she basically threatens him and says, hey, you know, she does have a contingency plan, which I wouldn't expect anything less from from Jadis, so it only makes sense that she would. She's a very intelligent person, and she always has been a very intelligent person, even in the main series. And then once you got to the world beyond, you realize that she's a very, very authoritarian woman, and she's really good at barking out orders and getting stuff done. So I just really like that banter that they had back and forth, where she basically threatens him, is like, hey, if you two try to run or escape, then there will be consequences, basically saying that they will go and, kill all the loved ones. And I actually do believe that it could be how this episode ends, or this season ends. I do think that, at the very least, I do think that Hilltop will end up being destroyed, because I do think that that's probably why in Dead City, Maggie's not at the Hilltop, she's at the Bricks, or a place known as the Brick. So I think that that's going to be because of something that Rick and Michonne ends up doing, where they ends up trying to escape or something, and then ends up getting caught. So I have no doubts in my mind that that's actually going to happen. I do think Jadis will rat them out somehow, or be involved somehow with with them, with something happening to Alexandria or the Hilltop. It's also important to remember that Michonne and Rick, neither one of them knows about the Commonwealth, so they don't realize that a lot of their friends are actually gone to the Commonwealth. They probably don't know that Daryl's gone. He's over in France right now, and they probably don't know. They probably don't know too much about Maggie and whatnot, and everything. So I'm plus the fact that Jadis even said that line, to me kind of confirms, almost like a little foreshadow. But given the fact that she said, if something happens to me, there will be consequences, I do think that something will happen to her and there will be consequences. Even if she doesn't die, I do think that there will be serious consequences. So then we come back to Michonne now, and as you can see, Michonne is just doing all of the training and going through all the drills like she's supposed to. But then we end up getting a really cool scene where she ends up taking down a walker, and then she ends up grabbing the head of a walker and actually flicks it, and it ends up taking the head off of another walker. It was just a really cool sequence, really cool combination move, so to speak, like a combo move, fighting move that she does, which of course Rick is a little bit nervous about this, because he actually ends up telling her, that she got to be careful. She's starting to stand out too much. She seems like she knows how to handle herself, and of course we know that this is very noticeable, because even one of her friends says it to her, or someone that she met here who's going through the same training. She actually looks at Michonne and she's like, hey, you seem like you're a girl who knows how to handle yourself. So Rick is getting a little nervous here, because Michonne is not really putting up with it the same way that Rick did. She's very resilient, she's very rebellious, and once again, very in line with her characteristics, but she's also very observant, and I'm loving how observant she is, and how she's sort of looking around the place to see if there's any opportunity or see any weaknesses in the CRM where she can either take over or actually escape or kill the right people. Whatever her decision will be eventually, I do like how she is, scoping out the area, and she's really using her intelligence in a way that really suits the character of Michonne. So then we end up coming over here to General Beale, and of course this is the funeral. This is a scene that we've seen in the trailer. Some people thought that maybe this was going to be a big character death, maybe someone like Jadis, or maybe even General Beale or something like that potentially, but of course we know that it's actually Oakenfour, and so this is a little bit of an emotional time for Rick, because even though he's not really, pro CRM, he doesn't really like them or really consider himself a part of the CRM. He did like Oakenfour, and he did like the ideology of Oakenfour, of the fact that Oakenfour did want to sort of take over the CRM and try to make it good, and sort of make it a type of military and a type of government that would actually help the people and not, actually oppress the people. So then after that little funeral type thing, General Beale ends up confronting Thorne and Grimes, Rick, and of course, once again, you can tell that General Beale knows a lot more than what he leads on to. I do think that he knows a lot about maybe even what Oakenfour was doing, and part of me even wonders after this episode if Thorne might not be sort of, getting a little comfy around General Beale as well, maybe feeding him some intel. I do think that something like that could happen. I would not be surprised if that was sort of like a big twist that happens towards the end of this season. Maybe we'll learn that Thorne was actually working for Beale the whole time, or something like that. I don't really know, but I do think that their relationship is getting better, especially after this one. And of course, after they leave here, or just as they're about to leave here, General Beale tells Thorne to get into the vehicle with him, and then they just drive off. And so later that evening, back at Rick's apartment, Thorne shows up, and she got like a bunch of stuff here, or whatever it is, or equipment, or like some kind of uniform or something like that, or whatever it is. But she ends up telling Rick that she has now been promoted. So I'm not 100% sure how the ranking system works in the CRM, but I would assume that she's probably now on the same level as maybe what Okafor was, but I'm not 100% sure. I could be completely wrong about that, but she is now a commander general, a command general, a sergeant or something like that, sergeant general or something like that, whereas Rick is like a sergeant general or general sergeant, but he's not a commander or something like that. So she does have a little bit more authority than Rick. So I think she's probably, but I just don't know if she's as far as what Okafor was, but I do think she probably is. And I think that O'Beal, or General Beal, sorry, is doing this to gain her trust, so that he's hoping to get some intel from her, at least, and that's what I would assume. I could be completely wrong, but I feel like that's why she got promoted. And but she is very different than Okafor, and she actually says that later on in the episode. She says how she's not the same as him, even though she agrees with his ideology and she does like what he represented. She is a little bit different, and she is going to do things differently. But at the same time, I do think that she's still an ally with Rick, and I do think that Rick will use her to try his best to protect Michonne. And so as soon as she leaves, Rick ends up hauling out all the maps and wires and all this, gear that he has, and he's taking notes, and he's paying attention to when helicopters are going and coming and dropping these dispersal bombs, or whatever it's called, to draw walkers away or to certain areas and whatnot. And so he's basically keeping notes of all this, and then he ends up passing that note on to Michonne one day when she's out at work, and she ends up reading it in her own privacy here, over by just over in this little corner where she's working. She kind of sneaks off, and when she reads the note, it has a list of instructions from Rick, telling her what he wants her to do. And so as soon as she reads it, then the plan basically goes into action, and we get this really cool montage of everything that basically Rick has set up for her. She goes to a locker, finds an envelope, a key, and I think it was a flashlight, and then she also learns with the letter as well, I think, that he ended up leaving something else there for her as well, which we learn is actually her sword. Then we get a really cool sequence here with Rick going through this tunnel-like area, and he's like clearing out walkers, but he's fully dressed up and armed in CRM gear. He's got that tactical equipment. One thing that I did notice during this sequence, whenever Michonne was looking at the time and whenever Rick was looking at the time, I did notice, and if you pay attention, you could tell right off the bat that this was happening at two different times, because their watches were, I believe it was like an hour apart. In fact, even when Rick gets to the destination, and eventually when Michonne gets to the destination, you can also see that the water and the tide is at a different level as well. So just little details like that I thought was clever, but I was able to pick up on. I mean, I'm sure most people picked up on it as well, but you could tell that there was a time difference, which was actually something that I was trying to think about. I was trying to figure out why they were showing us that, but I didn't realize until after seeing the episode, of course, that Rick didn't plan to go. And so Rick ends up coming out here now on this, little desert, little grassy area here at the river. Really cool tactical light he's using. Little red light, and which is oftentimes what they use, sometimes green as well. And he's basically, at this cleared out spot, and he ended up putting a boat here, or he has a boat or some form of canoe here waiting for Michonne. He also leaves her a little letter, and so later on, then when she gets here, once again, like I said, you can tell the tide is at a different level, so you know right away that this is happening during two different time periods. From what I can tell, it was roughly about an hour apart. But when she gets there, she gets the note, and she reads the note, and he basically tells her, hey, it's not possible for two of us to escape. The only way for this to work is if you go. And he basically tells her, you need someone on the inside of the CRM, or else they're just going to keep coming and keep hunting and potentially even kill everybody that you know. He tells her that, this is not a group that they can really fight against, or even push back on to that degree. And he basically tells her, if you love me, you'll just leave, go and take care of our children, and I'll take care of you here at the CRM. And which he did, because because he ends up having, I believe it was a walker or something. He tries to make it look like she was killed and bitten by a walker. So he did have everything set up for her to leave. But of course, we know Michonne, and even though Michonne does know and does realize that Rick has changed to some degree, or at the very least extremely oppressed, I think she knows that deep down he still do love her, and he would still choose her and the children if push really comes to shove. And I do believe that push will come to shove in the, towards the finale as we get through the rest of this series and the rest of this season. So the very next day, first thing Rick does is he confronts Jadis. Once again, this shows his relationship with Jadis. It shows that even through all of this, he still absolutely trusts her. He trusts her enough to go and tell her that he actually helped Michonne escape, and he tells her that there may end up being some blowback from it. But if there is any blowback, he basically tells Jadis that she needs to be the one that takes the investigation, and she should cover the investigation and sort of cover it up, but not to worry because Michonne will not return and she won't be a problem. Of course, that is until Rick ends up coming out, to do the morning drills and the morning duties like they always do. And we learn that Michonne actually came back, and she did not go whatsoever because she didn't want to leave Rick because she absolutely loved him, obviously. And even though she was sort of, there are times in this episode when she starts to give up on him, there does be something that sort of reunites that flame, that fire, which sort of sparks hope for her again, which is when she ends up going out into the communities, into the Civic Republic communities, and she ends up finding the painter who actually drew all the paintings that Rick had on the cell phones that he was leaving behind as a trail, as evidence, as clues for her to find him. And this was the gentleman that was drawing her and Carl and Judith, and sometimes also Rick. And she goes and meets with this guy, and he tells her the story, and he's like, hey, you must be her. You must be the girl that the guy is always talking about. You must be Michonne. And she's like, yeah, that's me and whatnot. And it was just a really cool, touching moment. And he was a really cool character, too. He's a really good artist. He does a really great job. But he has a really unique and a very distinctive style to his drawings. But I thought, once again, this was another great callback to the original series, because this was sort of their little thing that they did. This was something that Rick did all the time to try and make, to try to give Michonne hints as to where, how to find him and whatnot. So anyways, then later that day, we end up seeing Thorne and Rick, and they end up recruiting Michonne now to go and do this clearing, or to go and basically recruiting her to go do a mission. But before they actually take her on the mission, they actually ends up bringing her to this area that Okafor used to take Thorne and Rick. And they start to fill her in on this little secret, so to speak, of how they may or may not try to change the CRM to some degree and whatnot. And basically she tests Michonne and tests her liability. This is also the very first time when Michonne, or at least from Rick's perspective, he thinks Michonne is actually threatened, because Thorne puts her hand on his knife and Rick does draw his gun, and she notices it. But at the same time, he's smart enough to cover it up, because when she confronts him, she tells him, hey, you drew your weapon, which makes her very cautious about Michonne, makes her think that maybe Michonne means more to Rick than what he's leading on. But Rick covers it up, and he's like, well, I saw you grab your knife, so I grabbed my gun just in case I needed to cover you. So I think she did buy it here, but then when we get to the next sequence here, and they're actually out on the clearing mission trying to clear the walkers, this is when I think Thorne is now finally starting to realize that maybe Rick is connected to Michonne somehow. Well, they think her name is Diane. I think she said her name was Diana or Diane or something. But I think that after this mission, this is the first time that Thorne actually does think that there might be something a little suspicious going on with Rick and Michonne. So they come here to the mission, and as you can see, Thorne, Rick, and Michonne are here to clearing. They always tell Michonne to stay back because they don't really realize how strong she is. But of course, Michonne does what Michonne does best, and she ends up taking the lead, becoming a leader. But of course, Rick notices this, and he knows that this is going to be a problem if she doesn't follow orders, or she starts to, show her true colors and show them that she's actually more powerful even than Thorne herself. She's more, she's much more creative. She's much more barbaric. She's better at fighting. She's better with, she has more skills with guns and weaponry and swords. And so Rick knows that she will become a threat, or Thorne will see this as a threat, so he hops on right away and helps her to make it seem like she needed help and whatnot. And then we end up coming to this really cool scene where they're now sat down by the tree and they're kissing and making out, which is probably the first opportunity that they had to do this in a couple days or however long it's been since she's been there. They do seem to kiss every time they're together, and it was just a really beautiful sequence. But then we come to a scene then that's very tense, and we see Thorne holding up her weapon and looking through the scope, and Rick notices that she's has her weapon drawn, looking through the scope, and she's aiming it at Michonne because she now fully realizes that Michonne is a threat and was probably labeled wrong. Michonne was labeled as a B, the same as Rick, but maybe she should have been labeled as an A, where, because the A's were people that were considered to be leaders, and the CRM doesn't want any oppositions. They don't want anyone who could become a leader or gain traction with followers or become popular, which would cause problems to their military and to their militia. So that's not something that the CRM wants. And so Thorne notices this, and this is why she draws her weapon and points it at Michonne. But as soon as she does, Rick ends up once again getting into crosshairs of the gun, and and he intentionally saves Michonne once again. But I do think that Rick is starting to realize now that this is becoming problematic, and that he probably realizes that the CRM is going to get sick and tired of this and whatnot. And so after the mission, later on, then Rick and Thorne basically have some words, and she seems a little bit niffed at him this time, and this is when she actually truly tells Rick, I'm not Oakenfour. I'm not going to do things the same as Oakenfour. I do appreciate his ideology. I would like to sort of carry on what he was trying to do and change everything, so to speak, on the inside. But she says, she does sort of put Rick in his place a little bit, and I think that they might have also promoted Rick here at this point. And yeah, I'm probably ends up Rick and whatnot as well. But I do also think that Thorne ends up putting Michonne under Rick's authority as well, meaning if anything happens to her, he will be responsible. He will be reliable. But I think this is probably a good thing. I feel like Rick is not going to shy away from that anyways. This is probably exactly what he wants. I think he would want responsibility over Michonne and whatnot. And then my favorite scene of the whole series so far then is this scene when Rick and Jadis, Rick is talking to Jadis and whatnot, and Jadis realizes that Michonne actually did not leave, and once again sort of threatens him, and basically openly says that when it was only one of them, it wasn't really too much of a problem. But then she basically looks at Rick and she's like, with two of you together, that could be a problem. And so I really liked how Jadis really once again sort of threatens him, and sort of shows that authoritarianism that she has, because this is going to be a problem for her too. But the reason why I thought this was one of my favorite scenes of the whole series so far is because Michonne had no idea that Jadis was here. She had no idea that Jadis is the one that saved Rick. And now she does know, because Jadis just openly walks out in front of Michonne, revealing herself to Michonne. And Michonne is like, wait, what? Was that Jadis? And then we come to a little bit of a heartbreaking scene here, which is when Rick looks at Michonne and he's like, hey, everything that we used to have no longer exists. It's all broken now. There's just no way that we can get away from this. We can't go back to Judith. We can't, he basically lays it down, kind of says it like it is, because the CRM, they're not just going to let these two go, which is why I'm still very convinced that eventually the CRM will end up attacking Alexandria, and especially Hilltop. But we'll get into that again a little bit later. But it was just really heartbreaking to see Rick talk to Michonne this way, and this, I think, was the final push that Michonne needed to really, inspire her to start to take action, because then in the very final scene of the episode, what we get Michonne and Rick in a helicopter, and they're being transported to another location and whatnot, and Michonne actually ends up taking Rick, and she ends up pushing him out through the helicopter, and they literally fall out through the helicopter door, and that's how the episode ends. So I'm very curious to see, what does that mean for the episode? Like, are either one of them wearing a parachute, or are they flying over a body of water? What's going to happen with the helicopter pilot? I mean, did she kill the pilot, or is is the pilot oblivious? Because obviously, if they open the door, he's going to hear it. It's going to cause turbulence most likely, and just a lot of disturbances to the helicopter itself. So I'm very curious to see how they're going to get away from that. Now it is stormy. So I do suspect that the helicopter will not actually hover or stick around just because of how bad the weather is, and I just can't imagine that the helicopter would stick around for that type of thing. But either way, you know what I'm saying. I do think that it was a little bit silly that Michonne took this opportunity to sort of grab Rick and just try to escape. But at the same time, it does make sense too. Like we just said, they are covered by the weather, they are covered by the storm, which also means that the helicopter probably won't stay. It'll keep going to their destination, which should give them overnight, the entire night, and and it will. Nobody should come looking for them until the next morning, or at least until the storm passes. The only thing that I'm really curious about now is how will they be able to explain it? How will they be able to explain? How can Michonne explain her way to this? And how can Rick now tack up for her, even with his new promotion? This is a pretty big hiccup in the road for someone who just got promoted, for someone who's now taking responsibility for Michonne, and then for her to just grab him and jump out through the helicopter, through the side of the helicopter. I do think that what I'm trying to say, they know how Rick would be able to cover that up, but I'm sure he's smart enough and witty enough to come up with something, or between the two of them they can probably both come up with something. And so that's pretty well all the major stuff that happened in episode 3. I was a big fan of this one. It wasn't really a whole lot of action per se, but it was a very important episode. It had a lot of information. It did a lot of it did a great job at giving us more story, sort of showing Michonne and living here in the CRM, going through all the training that Rick went through. We now get to see Rick and Michonne going out on these missions with Thorne, and we got to see both Thorne and Rick, and being promoted in this episode. And so I'm very curious to see how all that's going to tie in later on with Jadis and General Beale. This might be enough for Jadis to attack, because Jadis already warned Rick twice, and now when the helicopter lands and they're not there, the moment Jadis finds out about that, I think they are going to be in trouble. So I do suspect that episode 4 will be very grounded. I think that most of it will be just a conversation type of a conversation or a dialogue heavy type of episode where we're just going to get back and forth between Rick and Michonne. I'm still not 100% convinced that she's going to tell him about RJ, but a small part of me thinks that she might, just because I think he's going to need to hear something like that to give him that final push to really be ready to run away from the CRM and to try to rebel. But like I said, once again, I don't really know how that would end for Alexandria. I'm so convinced that the CRM are going to attack the hilltop. I'm 100% convinced about that. I do think they'll attack Alexandria and even the kingdom. I think Dead City sort of give that away a little bit with Maggie living at the bricks. Why isn't she at the hilltop? Well, it has to be because of CRM. I mean, why else would it be there? Plus the fact that Jadis has been giving these subtle threats throughout this entire season, telling Rick, if you try to escape, you or Michonne or both of you together, there's going to be serious consequences. She also talked about her untimely demise, which makes me think that maybe Jadis will be killed in this season. I kind of hope that she's not. I would rather see General Beale be killed than Jadis. I'm actually a big fan of Jadis. I thought the actor does a great job at portraying the character, and I think she's a very interesting character too. And I would love to see her get her own show, or even have some form of show. Give her an entire hour-long episode. Let us see the entire backstory of Jadis. I really love her. I loved her ever since we met her in the junkyard. I loved her in World Beyond, and I really loved her here in this episode and in this series as well. So, very compelling character. Can't wait to see where she goes. But beyond that, my predictions for how the series is going to end, or where we're going to go now that we have reached, the mid-season finale. We're halfway through the season 1 now. No, I don't think that they actually confirmed the season 2 yet, which makes sense because they shouldn't, because I don't think they should confirm a season 2 until we've seen all the episodes. But if there is a season 2, then I do think that both Rick and Michonne will survive. Maybe not Thorne, maybe not Jadis. If there's a season 2, I'm 100%, or I think I could safely say almost 100%, at least 100% chance that General Beale will survive, because I could see him becoming the main antagonist for season 2, unless they decide to kill Beale and then Jadis got to cover it up somehow. Part of me just thinks that there's no way that Rick or Michonne can get away from the CRM without Jadis. I just feel like they need her alive, which is also why I think she has a contingency plan. But then again, at the same time, maybe she wouldn't have a contingency plan if she thought that they needed her. So I'm not really 100% sure how Jadis' story is going to go. But to me, it's 50-50. They could kill her or they could keep her alive, because I do think that they might actually need her. But maybe they'll kill her anyway. If anyone kills Jadis, it'll be Michonne. I don't think Rick will, but maybe Michonne will. And if there's a season 2, I think Rick and Michonne will survive. But if there's only one season, and this really is only a 6-episode event, then I could see definitely Michonne dying and maybe Rick, but I'm not 100% sure. And I only say Michonne just because I know Michonne is very heavily involved with Marvel and the MCU now. She got a character over there and whatnot. But, like I said, it's hard to know because these little mini-series can be done pretty quick. They're like little one-off shows. So, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see really everything that's going on. But I am almost 100% convinced that the CRM is going to attack the other communities. I do think that could actually be how this season 1 actually ends. If there is a season 2, they could literally end season 1 with the helicopters going towards Alexandria, Hilltop, and the Kingdom. And so, with that being said, folks, that is my review for a breakdown and a couple of little theories and just little thoughts and opinions on the episode and what we thought of the episode. I really loved Michonne in this episode. I think she was a standout. I really love how we got her personality a lot more in this episode, and I really loved how she started to take initiative, and I really love how she's now becoming a threat to Thorne. So with that being said, folks, let me know your comments or your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. If you like this video, click that subscribe button, and until the next one, take care.